All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for those of you who can join. We are going to be recording this. Several members actually contacted me who intended to join, but were not able to. So we'll be sharing a recording of this presentation. Yeah, we're going to just kick this off pretty soon. Thank you again for joining. This webinar is going to be presented by VillageReach. They have quite a few years of experience in testing UAVs. And recently, there's been quite a bit of discussion around how to manage stakeholders, the importance of community sensitizations leading up to UAV testing. So they're going to be sharing their experience. And if you have questions during the presentation, please just type them into the chat box. When you do, please also include your name and who you work with. The presentation will take about 20 minutes. And then following that, we'll address the questions that are in the chat box, but then also we'll give you a chance to raise any other points or questions through audio. So I'd like to hand it over to the VillageReach team. Let me share the presentation from my screen. Okay, all right, we're good to go.
Thank you, Paul. This is Charles Matemba from VillageReach, Malawi. I will be presenting with Luciana and Tokozani and Tamara, and this is a team that was on the ground doing the UAV stakeholder engagement earlier in the year. So as Paul has just said, we'll be sharing our experiences in UAV stakeholder engagement. Please move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. So as you'd imagine, there's a lot of interest and curiosity about amongst various stakeholders in Malawi about the UAV technology in general. As is the case, it's still a very new and evolving technology, especially for humanitarian applications. Although in the commercial and recreation spaces, there are some wide use, especially in urban centers. But in terms of the rural communities, generally this is a very, very new idea. And this is also where we're seeing a lot of, at the same time, potential use, especially in the public health domain. And yeah, as most of you might be aware, there is quite little use or evidence for use, and this is part of the reason why there are maybe several initiatives at the moment trying to test to see whether actually this could be utilized. Next. So in terms of the regulatory framework, I would just like to highlight that Malawi has had, although this is a very recent development, but we've had a very responsive and regulatory and progressive regulatory environment where the Department of Civil Aviation and partners have been very active since 2016 to try to put in place the necessary RPA regulations so that operators can follow. There have been some trainings within the department and also trying to find out what other countries, these include South Africa, for example, have got on the ground in terms of the regulatory framework. one thing that we should also mention is that this process has also been quite consultative, because they were able to take the draft regulations out to the general public for their input sometime in I think that was in October. And at the moment, the regulations are still yet to be gazetted, but we do have an aeronautical information circular that is currently in force in place of those regulations. I think a lot of this was presented by Department of Civil Aviation earlier this year at this forum. So I'll stop here in terms of regulation. Can we move on? So in terms of health, we've had in Malawi at least one test flight that involved sample transportation back in 2016 that involved UNICEF and Matternet, as well as VillageReach. And the second one is the currently ongoing cold chain transportation of blood and oxytocin for maternal health emergencies that involved, again, the Ministry of Health, VillageReach, Malawi Blood Transfusion Service, and Pharmacy Medicines and Poison Board, and was funded by Grant Challenges Canada. This experience we're going to discuss today is mainly being drawn from this particular study. There have been other initiatives, of course, in terms of, for example, mapping flood areas in one of the districts in Malawi, and also cholera mapping. This was done by, supported by UNICEF. I think that was in 2017 and 18. There have been network assessments and system design for AID sample transportation, again by UNICEF and JCI, and the various flights are taking place at the Kasungu drone testing corridor. This is the African's only drone testing corridor, which is about 128 kilometers out of the capital city of Lilongwe. So there are a lot of people, commercial and others, universities from outside the country coming in to test their drones. Let's move on. So coming back to the UAV stakeholder landscape, we see two main ones in this arrangement. This is particularly the Ministry of Health, and at the same time the Department of Civil Aviation, and supported by various partners, and including district council and communities. At the same time, we can look at our stakeholders in two ways. Firstly, by level, and secondly, by role. And by level, we had national level stakeholders, for example, ministry officials and from Ministry of Health and Civil Aviation and others. And from there, we also had two, or I should say 3 districts that were involved in the study, and these were also part of the, they formed the next level of our stakeholders. And from those 2 districts, we also had community level stakeholders, because we had 2 facilities or landing sites where these flights were to take place in. And those communities around those facilities or landing sites were also part of our stakeholders that we engaged with. In terms of roles, I think we had regulators that were actually from where we were getting our authorizations. As a study in health, we had to go through Ministry of Health, National Science Research Committee to give us the study approval. At the same time, the flights had also to be approved separately by the Department of Civil Aviation. From the districts and the others, moving down, we had district and city councils that were involved, where we had engaged the leadership in these areas, as well as the general community members or potential beneficiaries of such a study. Let's proceed. So in terms of components of the stakeholder engagements, we have put this into two broad categories. There was a lot of background planning work that took place for months, and then we also had the actual implementation of the stakeholder engagement. In terms of the planning stages, we started with of course, engaging with the donors, and moving on to consulting with the key national stakeholders and getting putting in place the protocol, and then getting that through the ethics committee in the Ministry of Health. At the same time, the Department of Civil Aviation issuing their flight authorizations, and from there setting up a national UAV steering committee. This was like more or less like a coordinating platform for the UAVs. There was a cross-section of organizations and individuals, universities that have interest in UAVs. Was not restricted to health. So, and this was a structure that was not in place before. So part of the preparatory stage work involved is setting up the committee. From the committee, then we moved on to the actual implementation, which focused on conducting focus group discussions across the different levels that I've talked about. The purpose was to get some, to understand the level of awareness and attitudes from the different groups, and get some feedback in terms of what issues they have in terms of the UAV and UAV transporting medical commodities, including oxytocin and blood. And the feedback from the focus group discussion was then analyzed, and we developed out of that a community sensitization strategy that reflected the various issues, knowledge levels that we actually collected in the different groups that we visited. And from there, after drafting that, we utilize district health promotion teams. These are health education units within districts that are used to go out to communities and spread different public health messages. So we had a training with these groups in the two districts, and they are the ones that, together with VillageReach and also Department of Civil Aviation, they are the ones that went out and conducted the actual sensitization. And it involved, of course, a lot of different communication mediums. We were using the radio adverts, we had posters and flyers in the communities, we had the press release in the newspapers, website release, health staff briefings, and of course the actual sensitization in the communities. And we're looking at a radius of about 1 kilometer around the landing sites. Right, let's move on. Yeah, so the very first activity, maybe in terms of on the implementation side, was the national level steering committee meeting, which is being chaired by the Department of Civil Aviation. And as I said earlier, there are people from different sectors, government, donors such as UNICEF, drone operators, and investors who participated in this activity back in February. And it also included, of course, the study partners for this particular initiative, which included the Malawi Blood Transfusion Service, Pharmacy Medicines and Poisons Board, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Justice, and the Education, Information, Department of Surveys, and also Department of Disaster and Preparedness, amongst others. Let's move on. Yeah, so in these pictures, you could see different presenters at this National Steering Committee meeting. The Department of Civil Aviation made a presentation in terms of regulations. There was a presentation from VillageReach regarding this particular study, and also another presentation from UNICEF based on their experiences in flood and cholera mapping within Malawi. And we had a cross section of stakeholders that participated in this particular meeting. From the national level, we moved down to the districts, and from the districts we moved down further down to the health centers that were involved in the studies, talked to facility level staff. And from the facility level staff, we also had a meeting with community level leadership. This included traditional chiefs, religious leaders, and many other key or influential figures at community level. And we also isolated two interest groups. These were the women who were also had a separate focus group. Because of the nature of the study, they were seen as the people who would be receiving the commodities that could potentially be transported using UAVs. So in total, we conducted 10 focus group discussions and reached out to about 130 stakeholders across the various levels that I've just discussed. Let's move on. Yeah, so you see in the picture, we had the women focus group discussion in Doha, which is a rural setting. And the other one was a focus group discussion comprising of health workers at the Area 25 Health Center within Lilongwe City. Let's move on. So what were the main findings from the focus group? This is the information that was key in coming up with content for the sensitization and approach. So in terms of awareness, we observed that generally there was low level of awareness in terms of EAVs in general. Of course, there was no uniformity in terms of awareness across the different groups of people, but it generally showed that those that were in urban settings were better informed about UAVs in general than those in rural settings. And those that were in the Area 25, for example, which is an urban health facility, it is urban. At the same time, it had been exposed to UAV studies before, and because they are also in the city, they have observed other maybe commercial or recreation UAVs before, so the awareness was much higher. In terms of perception and acceptance about using UAVs to transport emergency health products, across the board, people were generally positive about using the UAVs. There was no point at which anybody said that they were very uncomfortable with the UNVs, for example. The biggest benefit that was came out of the discussions was time saving. Considering that the UAV might be more efficient transport system than the traditional transport mechanism. Of course, there were concerns about how we would manage various risks. And this included, for example, especially in urban settings, they were more concerned about privacy consent. Some of them wondered whether the UAVs might end up being abused by some people and being used as spy planes, taking unauthorized pictures of people as they fly over. Whereas in the more rural settings, some of the concerns was one of the main concerns was that some people may associate the use of drones with some supernatural activities. This is an important point in the Malawi setting because earlier in the year, there were mass hysteria in the southern part of the country where people were being accused of, or there were reports of blood-sucking incidents, some sort of mystical activities that were very sensitive at the time. I think a few people were actually killed in the southern part of Malawi on the basis of that. The communities felt that there were some sort of blood-sucking activities going on. So given that we were going to transport blood, this was an area that we wanted to give good attention so that there's a clear understanding in terms of what this study was all about. From the district management team, one of the issues that took most of the time during the focus group discussion was about the sustainability of bringing in UAVs in their transportation mechanisms as districts, because they already have some challenges already. So they were wondering whether the districts would have the capacity if the study were successful, and whether the district would have the capacity to run and maintain drone transportation. So in terms of guidance, we got a lot of guidance from our stakeholders across the board, and this was included in our sensitization strategy. The first one being that of branding. We were advised that in order for people to accept and to gain their trust, first of all, it had to be an official Malawi government activity, and this was was supported by the fact that the people that were doing the sensitization were also, as I said earlier, they were the district health information teams. So that helped with the community seeing the activity as part of the government activity, government of Malawi activities. And the other issue was to do with the safety, especially of the crowds that get excited and want to come close and close to where the landing sites are. And we had, apart from the sensitization, we had also employed police officers to help with the crowd management, especially of children and road users. Let's move on. Yeah, the next one, I think we've covered this one. Yeah, so also other recommendations that came from the focus group discussion was that there was need to focus on the public health aspect, the potential for good use of drones. For example, relating it to saving lives, providing emergency commodities and blood to mothers during childbirth. And secondly, we were also told to make sure that we make the drones official and familiar, demystify the drone, take it to communities. Communities were allowed to come close, touch the drone, ask questions during the sensitization, so that there is no room for people to make up stories in terms of how the drones work or why we had drones flying in their communities. And also, we are advised to be upfront with information, to be proactive with information, so that there was no room for rumors or misconceptions. And as I said earlier, there's the issue of the fact that the drones were to be carrying blood, and blood is a culturally sensitive commodity in Malawi, and we also took time to explain that and get the feel of the community in terms of how they felt about that. I think one of the other suggestions was that we had to ensure that the drones had to be flying during the day so that anyone can see what is actually happening. We were also advised to avoid one of the refugee camps on the flight path to one of our landing sites, because it contains a mix of different people from different countries, of different experiences, most of them coming out of wars and so on. So ultimately, we're advised by the council to just keep our flight path away from the camp. At the same time, we just made it a point to go in and also do a sensitization. We had involved translators to translate our message into the different languages of the people that were living in the camp. And in the city, we also had some restricted fly zones and where we couldn't, prohibited and restricted flying zones where we had to fly away from. Yeah, so the third key component was the actual community sensitization. And as I said earlier, we covered a radius of 1 kilometer from the landing site, because we thought these are the people that would actually see or hear the drone. The activity was led by the government. At the sensitization, we had the district health commodity promotion teams. These are teams that the communities are already familiar with. They go out with different public health messages. And in addition, we had also a representative of the Department of Civil Aviation with a drone that we went to around the communities, showing the drones with. And the actual components of the road shows that we had within that 1 kilometer radius included drone demonstrations. We had acrobatics and theater that had developed plays around the activity, addressing some of the concerns that some people had. We distributed posters. There were PA systems, and we also had a question and answer session with the community. Like on the left top, you see there's a woman holding a mic. I remember this one was during the question and answer session. She came up and she said she was very happy that there were drones being tested, and now it means that if a patient needed urgent medical services, the drone would come, pick them up, and fly them to Lilongwe. Then immediately after she said that, everyone laughed, and I think she realized what she had said, and she came back and said, not picking up the patients, but bringing the commodities. So I think this was a very interesting and engaging discussion with the community, and also part of that, I think, for me, it shows some of the perhaps the aspirations that you could get from the people in terms of how drones maybe in future could be used. Next. Yeah, so these are the pictures in the different, in both districts, in Area 25 in Lilongwe and Doa. The gentleman in the green reflector is Hastings. Some of you heard him last time presenting about drone regulation in Malawi, so he was our key person flying drones and answering especially aviation related questions to this activity. Yeah, again, this is a continuation of the same. We had spent more time in Doha because that's where there was lower community awareness. We were in Doha for 3 days, while we were in Area 25 for 2 of those days. We estimate that we reached about 1,000 people who directly came and observed and listened to the sensitization message. But beyond that, we also had newspaper adverts, radio adverts, and we're sure we also reached a lot of people through that. Yeah. Next. So in terms of opportunities and lessons, I will invite Luciana to come in and talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. So we had quite a few lessons learned. The main lesson, I think, was that government ownership, interest, and championship are key. And when we started counting the number of cross-governmental organizations and Ministry of Health programs and departments that have supported us, we counted at least 15 different public institutions, ranging from not just the Ministry of Health, but also the police, the Department of Civil Aviation, the Ministry of Information was involved at one point, advising us on the key messages, etc. Starting with leadership from the Reproductive Health Directorate. The Reproductive Health Director herself was one of our study co-investigators. investigators, and she was heavily invested in terms of making sure the Secretary for Health signed the national press release that went out. She personally reviewed the radio adverts that were quite detailed, that went out to the population nationally, but also regionally. So we're very fortunate in that sense. There's a lot of excitement and a lot of support that came in from the public institutions across the board. Another big lesson learned was to plan and budget for meaningful engagement with stakeholders. The more stakeholders you're involved with, the more time it takes and more resources are needed for coordination and also for implementation. Our study didn't have a lot of resources, but we have chosen to invest heavily in community sensitization. In our case, we thought it was well worth it. Assume nothing, awareness and attitudes ranged by stakeholder type, by level, by location, as Charles described earlier. But in general, what we found was that all communities were very welcoming of this new technology. They found it to be useful from a public health perspective. So this was at the level of the community leaders, but also the community members, including some of the women that could one day benefit from the UAV technology, delivering maternal health emergency products. They also were just very excited to get close to the drone. They thought it was very interesting. So overall, it was a very useful and new technology. And local expert presence, we found that greatly enhances local ownership. Again, we benefited from the expertise of Hastings from the Department of Civil Aviation, who was the key person behind drafting the national regulations for drones in Malawi. And he was happy to come out and participate directly in the community level activities. He thought as well that it was worth doing that with the communities themselves. And we also had the district health promotion team. So these are people at the district level in Lilongwe district that are usually out and about in communities, engaging with the population at large. And they were also very happy to go out and promote this, explain different aspects of this new technology to the communities, answer questions, etc. There are a few other lessons learned from our perspective. Public education campaigns are best designed together with the stakeholders themselves. As Charles described, we started with a UAV coordinating platform meeting. We got advice from the national level stakeholders. And we also had some 10 focus groups discussions from the national level down to the community level. And we did get some very good advice at all levels. We did implement that advice as much as we could in our community sensitization strategy. So it was very much a user-centered design in terms of the public messages we came up with, the way we chose to distribute those messages, and the way we decided to engage with the communities. It was all derived from the discussions with the stakeholders themselves. Since this is a new technology and we saw fairly low levels of awareness about drones or UAVs, especially in the rural communities, we find that in-depth community sensitizations are truly worth the time and the cost. We know these are expensive. We know that not everyone has the time or the staff and financial resources to do this. But we do find that if you're trying to test or introduce a brand new technology such as this, this is the only way to inform the public about the potential benefits and risks, to explain the technology is still in this testing phase or not, what that means, in order to manage expectations. So we felt that doing all this in a balanced and transparent manner was the way to go, since UAVs are not very familiar to people in Malawi. We found overall that strong stakeholder engagement pays off. This ensures that stakeholders can make informed decisions about technologies they're not familiar with. then it helps if the technology is later introduced because you already have buy-in and there will be a smooth rollout. And finally, if for whatever reason the technology is delayed or does not work as intended, you can still have support for advancing the research forward. So we wanted to greatly acknowledge the study team members. As you can see, it is quite an extensive study team from the Ministry of Health to Malawi Blood Transfusion Services, Pharmacy, Medicines and Poisons Board, which is the medicines regulatory agency in Malawi, VIU for the flights, team and engagement, having engagement with us throughout the study. VillageReach, several of us, I think most of us are on this call today, and the 2 medical advisors on the study, and everyone truly supported in so many ways for stakeholder engagement and community sensitization. So I think this is it from us. We are very happy to take questions from anyone who might have them. And we do have Tamara, our colleague, on the phone with us, and we also have Carla, who serves as the study principal investigator, so they be able to answer questions from you as well.
Great, thank you, Charles and Luciana. If anyone has questions, please also introduce yourself with your name and who you work with. We'll just open it up now.
Hi, this is Matiko. I'm from GSI. So thanks again for the good work that you've done there. It's really very interesting, and I think you comprehensively did it. So my small question was on the stakeholder expectation and the community in general. How were you managing the expectation? I know with this new technology, people will be, expecting a lot and probably assuming a lot. So I don't know how were you managing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matiko. Charles, do you want to take this one? So since you're most heavily engaged and out on the road for the community sensitizations?
Yes. Thank you again, Matiko. I think we're managing this at several levels. The first level is to make it clear that what we're doing was to, the study in general was about assessing, trying to test whether this is a viable form of transportation. So a lot of people initially felt that we were out to start moving products using UAVs, but what we're trying to do is just to study whether that was actually a viable option. So that was at the first level to clarify that we want to get information that can help build evidence whether we are at a stage where UAVs can be used for this purpose. So that was one area, and the other things that came out, like I said earlier, related to various concerns about safety, privacy, and so on and so forth. So with regards to those aspects, we also took time to talk to stakeholders at different levels in terms of what the mechanisms were in place. For example, in terms of safety, what mechanisms were in place, inbuilt within the aircraft that we are going to use. Also, in case of emergencies, we had a team of emergency medical teams that were on the site. We had a team from the Department of Civil Aviation that were going to be ensuring that everything was actually being done right. So essentially, we just made sure that we were honest about everything that we knew about the activity, and we allowed people to ask any questions, and if they had any questions, they had the additional contact information for people from the Ministry of Health, from the Department of Civil Aviation, that if they see anything that they didn't like, they couldn't go to those people or reach to us. So at the end of the day, I think we just opened up to the people and provided the information so that they better understand what this was all about. Thank you.
There's also a question from Sarah De La Rosa. She's the ISG coordinator. She says, thank you for this interesting and informative update. I'd be interested to know what the next steps and continuation of this work is from the government side. And then she says, do you, VillageReach, continue supporting UNICEF drone activities for capacity building and technology training?
Carla, if you're on, do you want to answer this question that is also posted, I think, in the Zoom chat box?
Yes, that's the question in the capacity building.
Yes.
Great. So the next steps in continuation of this work is that we need to finalize the flights. We'll be doing a business development case. We'll be doing a cost analysis, and so that's this particular study and wrapping that up. But then after that, what VillageReach does is, helps work with different groups in the country. And so with UNICEF, while we are not particularly involved in their capacity building, we are always in communication with UNICEF, and have worked hand in hand. And so we're very interested in the capacity building technology training that they're going to do. Whether or not will play a specific role in it, we don't know, but in terms of advocating for it on both the global front and in country, as you know, secretaries of the UAV group would definitely do that. So we'll continue to advocate for that. Then in the long term, what we would all, I think, in Malawi at least, like to see is to move away from just the pilots and start to see either larger scale like clinical trial type things that show, where the value add is when you put it into a larger scale system, and then eventually, obviously, embedding it within the system. We've proven to be impactful.
Great. Also, just on the government side, she was asking, has there been any follow-up or next steps regarding this project that you guys have followed up with the government?
Yes. So what do you mean in particular? Like everything we do is hand in hand with the government. So we have multiple members who are involved. So from one of the other co-principal investigators, Fanny Kachale, the director of reproductive health services, is, she's heavily involved, obviously, as the principal investigator. And with the point person at the Ministry of Health, Civil Aviation is all involved. So we're in constant communication. What that question about particularly?
I think that answers it. I guess I have one question, just in terms of, considering how new the regulatory environment is for this type of trial. How did you experience in terms of engagement with, say, Civil Aviation, Ministry of Health? Did you think it was more you walking alongside them, figuring it out together, or did they kind of already have a framework of how they wanted to proceed with this type of a UAV test and the sensitizations?
So Charles, I can, sorry.
So let me speak to that from a more historical point of view, and then Charles can speak to it for the current system. So before, with the UNICEF study, it was being built out, both the community's sensitization strategy and even the regulations and all of those things. For this one, when we came in, there were at least already the regulations that were on the ground, and then the community sensitization, UNICEF had done a lot for the Kasungu corridor, and then and had some suggestions. But then Charles also worked with them on further developing it. So Charles, maybe you can explain from that point.
Well, I think that one of the key elements that made this part of work successful was the support that we had from the government institutions, Ministry of Health, and these various departments within the Ministry of Health and the Department of Civil Aviation. Like Carla has just said, they had been some work being done since 2016. And also, Luciana mentioned in some of the lessons to say the importance of government support and championship of such an issue. And this we were able to find in the Department of Civil Aviation and Ministry of Health. There was a lot of interest and support from that side that made this work quite go on smoothly. You can imagine that being very difficult if the two government institutions that were supposed to provide guidance in this particular type of study did not provide their full support. So we had quite strong championship from government side, and that helped a lot.
Great. All right. Well, we still have a few more minutes before the end of the hour. Maybe we could take another one or two questions. All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, we'll wrap this up. I'm putting, in case any of you who are joining are not currently on our mailing list for the working group, I am putting my email now in the chat box. So feel free to just email me and we can add you for future mailings. I'll be following up with an email with the recording of this webinar as well as a PDF copy of the webinar presentation itself. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. And we'll catch you next time at the next one. Thank you. Thank you, Charles and Luciana as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.